As you heard earlier in the show, a landmark legal decision has affirmed that Canada owes a legally binding fiduciary duty to provide adequate on-reserve housing. The December 5th ruling by the Federal Court of Canada is being viewed as a huge victory for more than 100 First Nations across the country. For more on the ruling and its implications, we're joined by our weekly Truth and Politics panel. Niigaan Sinclair is a columnist with the Winnipeg Free Press, and Jennifer Laewetz is the CEO of Paskwâw Strategies. Jennifer, Niigaan, after a month of illnesses and other travel issues, it's good to have the band back together again this week. Jen, we'll start with you. And two Northern First Nations, one in Manitoba, the other in Ontario, brought forward this legal action. The judge saying housing on reserve is, quote, poorly constructed. Well, what do you think this ruling might mean?
Yeah, it's nice to be back. I apologize. I'm actually sitting on a Nation's gas station traveling today, but I think this court ruling is very important because it removes the things like housing and water from just being program deliveries that have been historically very underfunded and not handled appropriately to now there being legal rights and a court ruling essentially saying like this is what needs to happen. I think the federal government kind of needed this nudge because as we see, there are still failing promises. The housing crisis is still ongoing. The water crisis is still continuing. And that Auditor General's report tells us year after year that, you know, the government of Canada is just not doing enough to address these issues. So I think this is a positive step.
Niigaan, poorly constructed might be an understatement for many First Nations. Leaders saying 1 in 4 homes in St. Teresa Point are uninhabitable, and over half of Sandy Lake's homes require major repairs. The court heard evidence of overcrowding, rampant mold, sewage issues, and unsafe electrical systems that have contributed to tragedies. Do you think this ruling could mean movement on the housing crisis on reserve?
Well, let's hope so. The fact is that the Liberal government, the federal Liberal government under Paul Martin years ago, instituted the 2% cap. That 2% cap then created a larger and larger gap over a long period of time. We were already behind in terms of adequate housing in those days, way back in the 1990s. And it just extended from the government of John Chrétien, Finance Minister Paul Martin, all the way now going almost 30 years. And so what you've got is a chronic problem that was made into an emergency problem. And that's what this court ruling is all about. I'll add to Jen's comments and to say, absolutely, 100%, we need a recognized right for housing on First Nations. I'll add a little twist in this. This actually feeds into the Carney government agenda. The only area that they are interested in building on First Nations is really housing. And they're saying that they're going to make this large commitment to infrastructure across the country. And the only really involvement of First Nations will be some housing. Let's hope that the money reaches those emergency situations, which of course will not in any way deal with the already existing emergent situations at other First Nations that are already problems. But we have to deal with these emergency situations. People are dying. And they have to do this right now.
Jen, you kind of touched on it. This ruling came on what First Nations leaders called a blockbuster day, as a second ruling on December 5th also confirmed that Canada has a legal obligation to provide safe drinking water to First Nations peoples living on reserve. That class action brought forward by Paskwâw First Nation in northern Manitoba and affects 50 nations across the country. Your thoughts on that ruling as well?
I think that part is really important. I think the fact that we're even discussing access to proper drinking water and even bathing water and water just for the necessities of life in 2025 is still crazy. I think, you know, this has been a long time coming, and I think we still have a long way to go because it's not just about ensuring and acknowledging that water is a legal right, but also what the government is going to do to provide that infrastructure. Because like I said, we've seen the Auditor General's report, unsustainable infrastructure, underfunding. Even when it comes to hiring water treatment plant operators, they can go and work in a municipality and get paid way more. So it's been really difficult to actually provide that infrastructure and to fight for it. I think we're seeing some of these nations take advocacy on the building blocks of what makes a healthy community. Because it's not just about housing, it's actually about giving families a safe place to live so there's no overcrowding, which leads to illnesses and leads to other problems. The water issue also plays into, you know, a healthy lifestyle and being able to live with, you know, the rights that our people deserve. So I think this is all a step in the right direction. But then on the other side of things, when we talk about housing, there's also that little piece of responsibility that falls back on us as well, that making sure we're doing our due diligence of the companies we bring onto our communities to build these houses and to build any type of infrastructure. Are they trusted community partners? Are they going to provide infrastructure that's not going to fall apart? Are they going to, make sure that they're not doing work in the cheapest way? So there's that piece too, as we go into moving into this new direction of providing more housing on what we're doing when we bring people into community.
And Niigaan, no doubt blockbuster historic victories here in the courts. But why do the Canadian courts need to reaffirm these basic human rights?
The simple answer is that they've never had to, because there's no public pressure on the issue. These are all legal requirements. None of these issues, housing, water, even just basic roads, basic infrastructure, all of these things were supposed to be guaranteed, not just as a human, as a Canadian, but also under treaty. And when there are often remote communities that don't get a lot of attention in media or from the Canadian public, other than perhaps watching APTN, the fact is Canadians just don't pay a lot of attention and don't put a lot of pressure on political leaders. We saw a little uptake of that, a little bit of attention. Think back to when the federal leaders debate was during a couple federal elections ago, when we had First Nations issues discussed at the national leaders debate. Suddenly there's uptake, suddenly there's attention across the country on the issue of boil water advisories, dealing with housing, poverty, getting the action done on the TRC and the Murder, Missing, Indigenous Women and Girls Inquiry. And so having that attention is so critically important, because this is not really a legal issue. We already know that they have to do this. It's just whether they will have the political will to do this. And it's really on Canadians to put pressure on. We put enough pressure on as First Nations people, and perhaps they're not listened to. We need our brothers and sisters across this country to step up and make their politicians pay attention too.
Right. Well, we'll leave it there. We're going to put a wrap on the recent AFN Special Chiefs Assembly over on the podcast. Thanks to you both.
Any question?
Jennifer, this time last week, the AFN was wrapping up its Special Chiefs Assembly. Any big storylines for you coming out of last week's gathering in Ottawa?
I think all of the chiefs, supporting the idea of opposing the pipeline deal in Alberta was one of the bigger ones. But the problem is that it seems that we get all of this motivation and momentum at AFN because we have all our leaders together in one room. But then we actually need the AFN to take that combined effort and to actually advocate for those things. We talked about last week, the close alignedness between AFN National Chief and her historical connections to the Liberal Party. And if anyone realistically is going to have some sort of sway, it should be the National Chief. And I'm really, really hoping that some of the conversations on the table last week are taken seriously, from the pipeline, child welfare conversations. It just seems like we're kind of all over the map with some of our bigger issues that we need here. And we really, really need AFN to take some of that seriously and to focus their efforts, because after Bill C-5 and even the treatment of chiefs getting limited time, it's frustrating to see what that played into. And now with this MOU in Alberta, we saw this coming, and it just feels like our national level was not prepared enough. And I say that respectfully, so I'm hoping that we see some better advocacy coming forward.
Niigaan, what about you? Anything stand out for you from the Special Chiefs Assembly?
No, well, the overwhelming story was the rejection of the Alberta-Canada Memorandum of Understanding around the pipeline. Everybody talked about that. In fact, even the Chiefs didn't really even pay attention after that. If you saw the pictures of the final day where there was this whirlwind of resolutions that were passed, it was almost 1/5 of the audience was still there. And that's disappointing. It also tells you a lot about, I think, the commitment of the Chiefs in regards to the AFN. But I want to be a bit positive here. There was a really wonderful recognition of Trishelle Bunn, who is one of the youngest chiefs in Turtle Island history for Manitoba. There was also a really important conversation on residential school denialism that took place on the floor. I was a little surprised about that. I was surprised that would take up the time of chiefs when they were such a big issue talking about resource development. And so as someone who is deeply impacted by this several denialists coming to university campuses and of course rejecting the findings of the Truth and Reconciliation Commission, I was inspired a little bit to see chiefs taking attention and caring a lot about that issue involving survivors. And so, it's a mixed bag always with AFN. I think the far more attention, and if I could bring this up, is all of the attention that the national chief spoke about at the AFN gathering, and then a few days later involving the 62 returned items from the Vatican that were sent back by the Canadian Council of Bishops and are now in the hands of a small amount of advisory group to send those items back, predominantly to First Nations and Inuit communities.
Yeah, and a shout out to the other young chief there, the young man whose name escapes me right now, as I was on a lot of medication for my illness at the time. Jen, what's the price of gas over there right now?
I think it's around like $1.25 or something like that. But
that's crazy.
I'm not gonna talk about tax exemption at a treaty gas station because people get really upset and think that somehow we're living the high life because of cheaper gas. So. Right. Thank you for asking me that.
$1.11 here in Winnipeg, much cheaper. Well, that's it. One more panel here for us in 2025 next Thursday, and that'll do it for us. So great to see you both. Thanks for being here as always.
Thanks.